Hello and welcome to Exploring Global Problems, a podcast where we talk to academics from Swansea University whose groundbreaking research is tackling global challenges, from health innovation to sustainable futures and the environment, from digital technologies to clean energy. My name is Sam Blaxland, and today I'm joined by Siraj Shaikh, Professor in Systems Security here at Swansea. Siraj's research brings together the fields of cybersecurity, systems engineering and computer science to focus specifically on systems security for automotive and transport systems. He's the co-founder and chief scientist for CyberOwl, which involves security monitoring for the maritime sector. Siraj, welcome to Exploring Global Problems.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's good to see you. Can I start off by just getting you to give us an overview of what your research is about?
So my focus is on what we call cyber-physical systems. These are systems that have some digital component in terms of its control or communication and some physical manifestation. So it could be a smart camera, smart home camera, or it could be an autonomous vehicle, or it could be any other consumer device that has some digital interface and so on. So we look at the security and resilience of such systems in terms of their ability to make to function effectively and securely, but also we work very closely with industry as well to look at assurance of such systems, which is essentially looking at methods to make sure that these systems work according to compliance needs, according to functional and non-functional needs.
So going back to basics here, to the fundamentals, when we talk about system security, what exactly do we mean?
So the popular notion, of course, is cybersecurity. A lot of that is around protection of data and digital systems. The systems element brings together that cyber-physical systems, so essentially a lot of engineered systems, but also factors in the human interaction, the supply chain in terms of all the components that a lot of these systems are built with, and also policy regulation, kind of compliance elements as well. And essentially, it's an attempt to bring together a number of those areas, but at under a kind of a systems view, where we don't necessarily delve deeper into a lot of individual components or particular techniques. We look at the assurance of the entire system. And in terms of my group, which is a system security group, it's a team of people, very able people who essentially bring together expertise from electronics, from computer science, from automotive engineering, and so on. We've have had a sharp focus on automotive systems as our key areas of focus for security and resilience and evaluation.
Yeah, and like I said in the introduction, and like you're kind of saying there, your work is at the crossroads almost of a few different disciplines. So the approach is quite multidisciplinary, is that fair to say?
That's right. Certainly there are very strong elements of engineering that we kind of work with, but there are also, as I mentioned, elements of kind of assurance, the science of assurance and compliance, which is where we have to understand these systems, these very technical digital systems, from a perspective of their application, their use, also the evidence that we have in terms of how they behave, and that could be a number of techniques and multidisciplinary techniques from human factors, techniques from economics, and so on, to essentially get systems to a point where they meet real world kind of compliance needs and so on.
Tell us about your background. What did you initially specialise in and train in, and how did you get to where you are now?
So over the last 25 years, I've stayed in academia predominantly, but done a lot of work with industry. I started off as a traditional computer scientist. The word cyber wasn't really in popular vocabulary when I started doing my PhD in what was cryptographic protocols and their analysis. And then I had the good fortune of working across a number of different research teams where I was able to pull in different techniques and different kind of inspirations. In the last 10 years or so, we've had a very strong focus on the automotive and transport systems. And we've tracked their evolution very carefully in terms of the whole digitization that's happening, a lot of the kind of software intensity and the software kind of enabling of these systems, and of course the need for cybersecurity was something that's arisen. So just to share this with you, when I started off, this was 2010 onwards. I was talking to a lot of my senior colleagues, and I said, these vehicles, they could be hacked once they have lots of digital components. And I was laughed out of the room as much. And then lo and behold, 10 years down the line, it's a massive industry. There are global standards that are enforcing the entire automotive industry and transport industry to make sure
everyone's talking about it.
Absolutely. And so, I think we started off with that, and then we grew a whole team, and here we are.
And you've come to Swansea relatively recently. What brings you here?
Swansea University has a very credible computer science department with a very strong focus on software engineering. They also have a very strong HCI group, an AI group. And once again, all those three areas converge when it comes to automotive kind of challenges as well. There is a very big semiconductor community here as well that do research in power electronics and so on. And so a lot of my work is increasingly now going into hardware assurance, secure hardware and assurance. So there are a number of these communities, and I'd like to be right in the middle of a number of these communities and work across them. But of course, Swansea as such, as a region as well, in terms of South Wales, there's a big push on a lot of defence technology, kind of manufacturing. So why not?
Yeah, great. Now, we've been talking a little bit so far about system security and security threats. And obviously, security threats are paramount in some people's minds. They worry about it. And you did mention about cars, etc., being hacked. But just in terms of real-world examples and real-life examples, if we think about small security threats or large security threats, what might we be talking about here?
So it's just important to understand the kind of significant departure in terms of threat and the risks, I should say, when it comes to cyber-physical systems. So the traditional kind of threats, what I call commodity threats, all around the disruption around the computer on our desktops or our mobile phones, or the loss of data, or the loss of kind of data across an enterprise, and so on. With cyber-physical systems, there's a physical element. And that means these systems could have a physical implication. So we've seen over the last decade or so attacks on energy systems. We've seen them on rail systems. We've seen them on the automotive systems, of course, as well, and so on. And that means that safety and physical safety related implication is real. And that could lead to, it could lead to damage to people. It could lead to damage to infrastructure and cost, of course. So that's why the stakes are high now, and the risks are ever so more kind of real.
Mm. So, focusing just on the car example that you gave a minute ago, what threats particularly are there specifically to the systems of modern cars?
Okay, so almost across the range, most modern vehicles now are connected in some shape and form, either through our mobile phone connectivity or direct connectivity for a number of different reasons and so on. For example, navigation and so on. And that connectivity, of course, could be exploited. And we've seen examples of it where it has been exploited. And then, of course, that could affect the digital interaction, but it could also affect the control systems on the vehicles. So which means that the acceleration, the braking systems, so the maneuvers. And we've seen some examples where this has been demonstrated.
And what's happened?
What's happened is we've seen examples where a vehicle right in the middle of the road, was pulled over and remotely controlled and manipulated. And, we've seen those demonstrations there. Now, have we seen any widespread attacks on the wider public? We haven't seen those, not on the record anyway. We've seen lots of demonstrations where research teams all over the world have taken different popular models and shown that we could do different things. We could disable the braking, for example, and so on. So that of course, it's, I think, road safety is a huge issue, as it is, without just cyber.
Indeed.
And I often mention this. Statistically speaking, we are more likely to be affected, or die of a road accident than a plane crash. So people, it's a perception issue. When you're on a plane, you think, okay, well, you get a safety demonstration.
Yeah.
You don't get a safety demonstration necessarily every time you sit in the car.
No, I mean, you're in charge of this extremely heavy ball or structure of metal,
exactly,
traveling very fast, and it's you pretty much in
That's
control.
right. And on single carriageways, if you think about it, the right besides the lane besides you, there's a car coming the opposite direction. So it doesn't take much. So hence, I think in the automotive industry, I would say compared to a lot of other industries, the automotive industry is leading the way when it comes to standards, also when it comes to research. And when it comes to a lot of techniques to make sure that they can assess these vehicles, test these vehicles, and so on.
And you're saying that it's leading the way because almost it needs to, because driving is dangerous and a lot of us do it and a lot of us don't do it very well, perhaps.
Yes, I think the understanding of road safety, of course, is quite mature. The industry has had nearly 100 years of looking at safety in different guises. And that has meant that the security elements, which is relatively recent, but still are being taken very seriously. And also the culture in the automotive industry, the engineering culture, is driven by standards. So I think that's a good thing. So once they can agree on and have consensus on standards, then they can enforce it. And that's important. But it becomes a benchmark. And then, you build over it. And the other thing, of course, it's quite visible, and if you think about it, it's one of the most complex consumer products that we have. So, aircraft, for example, aren't, as consumers, we can't buy aircraft. We can buy the travel on it. But the cars, we're all buying cars and electric vehicles, everything else. So they're not disappearing, right? They'll evolve into perhaps more software-defined vehicles and, more electric vehicles and so on. But they'll still be there. And so, as such, I think it's very important that we take this seriously.
Again, just thinking real world, and anyway, for me, quite personally, I've just got rid of an old car, and obviously I knew it had a computer chip in it and all this kind of stuff, but it felt very much like I was driving it. It had everything seemed quite manual and quite like it was me in control. And the new car I've got, whilst it feels so much easier to drive and I probably feel safer in it, I recognise that it's very high tech. And in terms of what you were saying a minute ago, I mean, I had this image of my car will potentially sort of take over from me at one point. Just for someone who maybe might not be in this field at all, is there a real danger that one day, if the worst came to the worst, your car might not behave as you wish it to behave?
So, because of a lot of safety work that's been done, the good thing is that that loss of controllability hopefully would not happen and would not realize as a risk.
Sure.
Although, as I said, there has been attacks that have demonstrated this, but there is potential for a lot of other disruption in terms of in-cabin systems. Damage in terms of a number of systems and features. You could imagine perhaps a ransomware attacks where your car may be locked out, and then it becomes a game where if you have to pay 20 quid to get your car back, maybe that's what you would resort to, and so on. That's what we see. The economics of ransomware attacks we see in traditional kind of digital domains is exactly that. They want to extract money out of you, and they want to not make it too high that you completely give up, but low enough that you would say, I'll tell you what,
sure,
I want it back, so I'll just pay it off. So, I foresee a future where that's already impossible.
Yeah, moving from old-fashioned stealing of hubcaps or whatever to, locking you out of your,
absolutely.
of your car without you knowing.
Absolutely.
Knowing it.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. What's your view on self-driving cars and autonomous vehicles and things like that?
So I think we are over the hype for sure. Over the last couple of years, we've seen some very big companies taking a step back and saying we're giving up on this. But there are, in the UK at the minute, there are 7 trials that are funded by the government that are once again getting this technology closer to commercialization and actual deployment. I think there is definitely a use for it. The initial deployments may be low speed, maybe niche use cases, in controlled environment and so on. But I think it's still some way before we actually see self-driving vehicles on the road. I should just add, it's interesting because one of my earliest fascinations when I was young was a program called Knight Rider. So this was where David Hasselhoff had this very fancy car, which could speak to him as well and drive itself. In a sense, I think I don't think we should give up on that future. I think the point is, we've seen technology that has evolved in the last 50, 60 years, which was very, very, unconceivable.
Seemed very futuristic.
That's right. But if you think about elevators. If you think about it, I mean, elevators are completely autonomous in that sense. Well, they're guided, but still, and quite safety critical.
Sure.
But they work in most places very well. So, they have a quite an interesting history as well. So, coming back to it, yes, I think we should expect a future where they will become real, but it will be some journey towards it. The other thing just to mention also is there are competing priorities at the minute in terms of electrification particularly. So the whole net zero and battery-related electrification of vehicles, that I think has to take priority. And it's all a matter of where resource from the government and from the industry is diverted to achieve what goal first. And so I think it'll take some time, but it's for real.
Yeah, I can imagine if you put the human element into all of this, or maybe the non-human element into it, that with self-driving vehicles, you could probably convince people the technology made them safer, even, but only a few things have to go wrong, and people think, well, I wasn't in control there. It wasn't me, sort of the autonomous kind of being controlling stuff. Do you think there's a hurdle probably to cross in terms of convincing the public at large that these things are right? Yeah,
absolutely. I think there will be a phase where that perception, that risk perception, but also that accepted public kind of acceptance, they'll be tested. But we've accepted so much technology. We obviously these days, the most topical thing is, these AI language models, which are surprisingly scary. And I hear all kinds of commercial applications coming out of it. And so, people are quite accepting of it. As an academic, I tell you, I'm worried about the whole debate around the curriculum and assessment.
Tell me about it. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So, but we can't ignore it. So I think we are risk averse as a society early on, but we're also very adaptable. And we've just gone through COVID as well, and once again, I mean, both the way we went in, and a lot of us shifted to digital for a lot of our education, other services, and so on, and also the way we came out of it. Because I remember a lot of these doomsday scenarios and everything else when we were going into it, and this is the end of the world. And I was saying to my friends and colleagues at that point, I said, well, give it a year, and once we're all vaccinated, this will be a distant memory. And, you and I are sitting here in the same room, pretty comfortable.
In person, no masks. It's great.
Exactly.
And I guess we are adaptable. I mean, I carry around 2 computers with me. I got one in my pocket, one in my bag all the time.
Who would have thought a few years ago?
Yeah, and I'm not even techie. I want to talk about AI in a second, but just before we do, sticking on the vehicles for a second, the SAMS project, is it that Swansea's involved in?
That's right.
Tell us more about that.
Okay, so I mentioned the 7 big trials that the government has funded recently in the UK, and I should just mention, I need to really applaud the government, and I think generally the industry here, because we are leading the way globally when it comes to regulation and policy, when it comes to trials and testing, when it comes to some of the niche OEMs who are pushing out this technology. In all those 3 areas, I think there are very clear kind of developments and milestones that we've achieved. And these 7 projects are meant to drive this technology all the way to commercialization. So my group is involved in 2 of those 7 trials. And for both of them, we're doing a system-level risk assessment. SAMS is essentially a autonomous mobility shuttle service up in Sunderland in north of England, where there is a defined route where it's going to serve as an autonomous shuttle from different transport hubs and different public service points. And the whole project over 2 years has a very long trial period and of course an entire parallel study period and design period where we will evaluate and establish a safety case. We will do a very thorough cybersecurity risk assessment, and then we'll conduct trials. Our other academic partners are looking at kind of public acceptance and trust elements, and then there are a number of other kind of commercial partners looking at the economic case, looking at the city council and the planning kind of elements of it as well, and so on. And these, once again, as I said, this is real. We are being tested. That by the end of the trial, we need to demonstrate that this could become commercial, not just technically viable and feasible, but also accepted by the public and commercially kind of viable as a business case. So we are being tested against those criteria, and I'm really hopeful that and the other project as well, both of them, they would take not just our research and understanding, but also overall nationally our kind of capability in this kind of area much further ahead. So yeah, interesting times ahead. We are all hands on deck on this one. It's a massive commitment. I'm very excited.
Talking of the future and interesting times ahead, going back to AI, which I promised that we would. I mean, cards on the table. I probably would have been a Luddite back in whenever it was, the late 18th century, and smashing up the hand looms and all that kind of stuff. But I see some real kind of worries with artificial intelligence. I also accept that there are obviously huge possibilities, but it seems to me quite a daunting thing that we're facing. That almost kind of, I don't know, perhaps dehumanises society. I would maybe even go that far, but what's your take on it in general?
So, as a computer scientist, but as also someone who's just interested in wider public discourse and the narrative, we have to separate these two out. As with many technologies, and as is the case with cybersecurity as well, I think the language and the narrative that we build around it matters a lot. With cybersecurity, for example, if I just address that, it's often treated as a risk management kind of an exercise, which it is to some extent, but it's never seen as a value proposition. I think we should see it that way. When it comes to cars, for example, car companies would love to sell cars and say this is a safer car. That becomes a value proposition to the consumer. I would like to see, and hopefully soon we'll see a point where they can say this is a more secure car. So the public narrative, I think, is very important. With AI, there is a lot of hype and a lot of excitement in that sense. But of course, there is that doom and gloom as well. And I think that's partly because we have perhaps mismanaged expectations around what AI can deliver. As a computer scientist, so when it comes to advisory applications, AI could be great. So it can advise us when it comes to certain tasks which need automating, and with a little bit of kind of intelligence built into them, maybe perhaps classifying certain images, for example, and so on. AI can be great, but beyond that, for safety critical applications, for more kind of contextual, deeper analysis, we have some way to go. And I think most AI experts, I suspect, would agree. The language models, for example, we see these days are great in telling us, in writing a whole essay. But, if you go in and ask who won the last Football World Cup, it'll get all kinds of, false answers, right? So getting the facts right is very important as well. So my point here is that technically there is definitely a journey, and I think the AI community sees that journey, but it somehow sometimes gets conflated with the narrative that's built around it, the popular narrative that's built around it.
I guess go back to my Luddites analogy in some ways. I think there's a concern, isn't there, that it might end up taking away the role of people to do stuff that actually it can do better, but which people and humans find fulfilling or gives them meaning to do.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought this up, Sam, because I'm going to say this, and I think this is where I'm not an AI kind of expert at all. I'm a student. I'm a keen student, but once again, it's a technology that is obviously fast changing as well. a lot of early applications of AI are actually very, very good automation. So the difference here is automation really here is that there is a kind of a digitized, mechanized process that's implemented for certain decisions. And we often confuse that with AI, right? So we are getting very good at automation. If you walk into, talking about automotive, if you walk into any manufacturing assembly plant for automotive, you would see all these robots. And they're very smart robots. Some of them may have AI, but largely they're just automated. And they're automated to a degree where they would respond in certain unexpected situations because they're designed and configured to do so. But they're following a script, essentially. Now, if you then push on AI, so actual intelligence and that smart ability, then yes, we definitely, can add value. But beyond that, seeing anything more beyond that, I think there are certain examples, but it's still some way to go. The language models are definitely impressive. What we see with ChatGPT, for example.
Well, it can compose symphonies, or not the ChatGPT, whatever
and
it's
write
called.
poems.
I mean, which I don't know. I can. It'll be really interesting to listen back to this conversation in a couple of decades' time, because I suspect there's going to be a need, a sort of desire for non-AI created stuff. People will go and listen to a symphony or whatever that has been created and is played by humans, even if it's not as good as something that AI can do, because people want some sort of human interaction.
I think that's a much more philosophical kind of a discussion.
Yes, it is.
Because as society becomes more advanced when it comes to some of these technologies, our values would shift. And what we would crave for in terms of that aesthetic value would definitely shift. That our sense of fashion, our sense of kind of taste around a number of these things would definitely change.
We could do a whole podcast on it.
Absolutely. I would love to.
Yeah, well, we might have you back. I mentioned in the beginning cyber owl, which I assume, which conjures up an image of me of some very large mechanical bird that can turn its head in 360, but it's obviously not. Tell us more about cyber owl and what it is.
So there are two narratives around it, and I want to share both if I have time.
Of course.
So cyber owl is a established commercial kind of venture that looks at risk analytics and cybersecurity risk monitoring on vessels, on actual kind of maritime vessels and ships, and it's deployed on a number of quite a few ships now all over the world. We have essentially a big presence in East Asia, in Singapore, growing presence in the Middle East, and also a big presence in Europe, and there are other regions as well. And so this was a result, so it was founded about 7 or 8 years ago. This was a result of my research over 10 years looking at risk analytics. So this was really the very early fundamental data science, the precursor to AI as such, and looking at how we can monitor for threats. And the focus there was early warning systems, how we can bring that warning of a potential threat early on. And so it's a patented technology, very credible in terms of the science that is built up, award-winning. And then the commercial journey is something that we spun out of my previous organization, previous university, and it's established as a team in terms of a commercial team that leads it. I'm much more hands-off now, but I'm kind of, as a shareholder, of course, and on the board, and input into the strategy for it and so on. But yes, that's that's a success story that I'm quite proud of. I think a parallel narrative on this, just to say, is that once again, as an academic, I have always been, right from day one, very interested in translating the research into commercial policy and user kind of benefit, and amongst other kind of efforts and interests, CyberOwl has been obviously a very key pillar as a demonstrator of that research and that translation.
And the significance of the maritime element specifically, as opposed to your work on cars and...
So it's two things. It's the timing of it. I think When we were spinning out and looking at commercial applications, maritime was ripe at that time. The second thing is, of course, so my interest in cyber physical systems, as I've said earlier, has been there right from the start. So the kind of technology in terms of the analytics that I was working on was very suited to systems like those. And maritime, partly because of some of the regulation, partly because of the way the industry was, and partly because some of the threats that have emerged over the years in the industry, offered a very good commercial application. And of course, it's been tailored and further developed, through its commercial phase, where I've been much more hands-off, because it's built on the science, but then it's evolved and become quite a sophisticated kind of an offering. That it just meant that we were well suited for that sector right from the start by design, but then since then by evolution as well.
Now, you've touched upon this a couple of times, and if there's anything I've learned from doing these podcast series is that big things like this, big research ideas like yours, tend to involve a lot of collaboration. You're working not just with people here, but with people in other universities, but also with, like you say, commercial enterprises, businesses, etc. So, I mean, your work must feel very collaborative.
Yes, absolutely. So I can't think of a piece of research that I've done where I haven't pushed myself in terms of that interaction, either across sciences, across disciplines, or across other communities, or across, that idea of me locking myself up in the lab doing something, that's not me, right? And that's partly because of the nature of the work that I've done, and partly just because of my instinct, and so on. So yes, so I'm very, if I reflect back, I've always been driven by that need that I need to show value for the research that I do. And value in that very human value sense. That's partly because it's the validation that you get. And partly because I also think that enterprise, commercial enterprise, is inherently good for society. Money is a good driver for us. And if you align it well, and then of course regulate it well, then it can deliver good. So, and I've had competing views, and conflicting views on this from my computer science kind of, peers and colleagues. But a lot of them equally have spun out and, done some great commercial kind of work as well. So, that's been my thinking throughout.
And again, I've touched upon this a little bit already, but the nature of your work, it does involve things like, questions over privacy and safety, and I guess data and financial risks and all this kind of stuff. And how much of your time do you feel like you're fielding things that actually aren't related directly to your research, but are maybe more political with a small p, I suppose?
That's right. So I mentioned compliance and regulation very early on, because that is absolutely key. Just by the nature of it, a lot of these engineering systems that we work with are regulated, and particularly in Britain, I think. I've had the kind of luxury and pleasure of working all over the world with colleagues all across, and our approach to regulation, our approach and sensitivity to ethics of technology, our consumer awareness elements, all those 3 or 4 things, I think in Britain makes the science and technology in these areas much more informed and much more responsible, but also very insightful and aware of a number of those kind of issues. So privacy, absolutely. I think that human factor is very important. I can't think of any technology or digital project where we're not factoring in the user. The economics of it as well. So we're increasingly, for example, the last few years, we've definitely, as a country as well, but as a region, been more sensitive around the supply chain. So where are we getting our components? How ethically governed those regions are? What our sensitivity to that is? How sustainable are they? And so on. And then also, of course, the kind of in-life regulation. So once we've had this technology and once it's sold to a consumer, we don't forget about it. It's about how do we manage it all the way to even post-life, even to the point where it's discarded. And I think that's very good. I am a big champion for good regulation. So I think we need, and the more we engage people like myself and others and so on, I think that could deliver the benefits.
We're doing a podcast. You are no stranger to podcasting, are you? Higher Purpose, is it? Is that the show that you?
That's right.
That
Yes.
You do?
Okay.
What's all that about?
So, okay, this started pretty much while I started at Swansea. Mid last year, I had the pleasure of working with an Ofcom licensed community radio station in Birmingham called Unity FM, and they do a lot of kind of community work, religious community work, but also kind of more diverse. And we were talking about campus life with the colleagues who were running it, and they were looking for volunteers as well. And I said, I want to make campus life much more accessible, transparent, because campuses are. I've spent 30 years of my life on campus as a student, as staff, and all over the world. I've had the pleasure of visiting campuses from South Africa to Japan to North America to Latin America. And I'm fascinated by campuses because they're so diverse. They're amazing, it's a great deal of life and ideas and emotions and so I thought, we need to make this more transparent. And Birmingham is remarkably diverse, of course. So Higher Purpose aims to look at higher education journeys, but from a very strong ethnic, diverse a perspective. So making lives a lot of people who come from all diverse walks of life, but also people who may not be diverse as such, may be part of mainstream society in all meanings of the way, but are making interesting developments or initiatives around curriculum to make them more accessible and diverse and so on. So we started last year. We've done over 24 episodes now. It's broadcast on the radio, but it's if you Google Higher Purpose on Spotify, it's there. And I'm really proud of it because I feel it's my cultural contribution, right? So I as a computer scientist, I never thought I'm going to do an actual podcast. We can work out the algorithms, but actually doing it's been a fascinating experience so far.
And are you normally in this seat or in that seat, or is it more of a discussion?
It's more of a discussion because sure. I'm sharing my kind of stories as well.
Yeah.
I've had people come and cry when they've talked about their journeys. I've had people come and talk about the great number of the championed initiatives that they've taken on. I've had lots of students who've talked about their own experiences. Some of them the very first in their families' generations to be a graduate. So it's all very enlightening. I'm just glad that I'm able to incite those ideas in a conversation. That's always the challenge, right?
Great. Now, people will be listening to us. They might be listening to your other podcasts as well, obviously, which is great. But potentially young people who are thinking this sounds like an interesting, a cool, a topical area of research that they want to go into in the long run. So, what advice would you give a young person who maybe wants to do a degree in this kind of subject or even further study?
So, first of all, I would highly encourage people to look at this. I think what people need to realize is as technology matures, and we've already touched on, autonomous vehicles to AI to security, it will become more regulated. It'll become much more governed, but also industries will become, because of financial pressures and so on, much more economically cost effective as well, and so on. So it needs brighter ideas. It needs that disruption. I think a lot of these industries are challenged, open to disruption, and receptive to fresh ideas and so on. The other thing, of course, is a lot of these areas are becoming multidisciplinary. So if you have a history degree, don't shy away. You can come in and inform.
Be a Luddite.
I said that deliberately.
I'm being flippant. No, history gives you some very good analytical skills.
Of course,
definitely.
Absolutely. From that to law to economics to engineering, and I think the other thing, of course, is that there are cycles that we see. So certain industries go up and down from different times. The automotive industry, for example, we've seen a decline in manufacturing, but there are that decline means that there are a lot of people who are looking for that disruption or perhaps new ideas and so on. We're also a much more global world, although, we wouldn't believe it in this country, but we still are very well connected to colleagues in Europe, to North America, and so on. And so we should definitely, have that broader view. And any piece of education or learning journey that anyone, kind of starts off on, I would encourage them to, travel, talk to people in other regions, talk to businesses in other regions. There are potentials for apprenticeships, placements these days as well. Definitely, absolutely expose yourself in that sense.
Well, it's been a really enlightening conversation, Siraj, and very interesting, so thank you. If you want to find out more about Siraj's research, you can visit his staff profile page on Swansea University's website, as well as cyberowl.io, and cyberowl is one word. To find out more about this podcast and Swansea University's research, visit swansea.ac.uk/research. That's all from us today. Thanks for listening, and thank you again to my guest, Professor Siraj Shaikh.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow us. I'm Sam Blaxland, and that was Exploring Global Problems from Swansea University.